What if some of the healthiest, most resilient foods in human history were buried thousands of years ago? Long before protein shakes and kale chips, ancient Egyptians were cultivating plants that could survive desert heat, nourish entire civilizations, and even make it into the afterlife. Let's take a bite out of history and see what we've been missing. First up, the tiger nut. No, it's not a nut. And no, there were no tigers involved. This little wrinkled root, also called chufa, was one of the most important foods in ancient Egypt. And today, most people wouldn't recognize it if it rolled across their kitchen floor. Tiger nuts aren't nuts at all. They're tubers, like tiny underground potatoes with a sweet tooth. Ancient Egyptians loved them. They ground them into flour, roasted them for snacks, and even used them to make sweet desserts. One of the oldest recipes ever recorded, a honey chufa cake found on a 4,000-year-old papyrus scroll. That's older than your grandma's cookbook by a few dynasties. But tiger nuts weren't just tasty. They were survivors. They grow in sandy soil, need barely any water, and store for months without spoiling. That made them perfect for Egypt's scorching climate and unpredictable Nile floods. In a time when refrigeration meant, hope it's winter, chufa was a food you could count on. Nutritionally, these little guys are loaded with fiber, potassium, and healthy fats. In fact, modern dietitians have started calling them a paleo superfood. Ancient Egyptians didn't have buzzwords, but they knew value when they tasted it. And here's a fun twist. Chufa didn't stay buried. It quietly migrated through trade routes and now survives in Spain, where it's used to make horchata de chufa, a sweet, creamy drink that's basically history in a glass. So why did we forget it? Blame industrial agriculture. Tiger nuts are small, hard to harvest, and don't fit neatly into modern supply chains. But in ancient Egypt, they were a star crop. Resilient, versatile, and just sweet enough to feel like a treat. Chufa wasn't just food, it was the root of comfort, survival, and dessert. Next up, the Labla Bean, which sounds like a toddler named it, but don't be fooled. This climbing vine was a drought-defying, heat-loving miracle machine. And ancient Egyptians? They knew exactly what they were doing when they planted it. Labla beans weren't your average green snack. They grew fast, climbed anything, and produced heaps of edible pods, leaves, and seeds. If farming were a sport, Labla would be the overachiever, sprouting in the dry season when other crops just gave up and wilted. What made it even more valuable? You could eat almost every part. Young pods were boiled like snap peas. Mature beans, cooked into stews or dried for storage. Even the leaves made it into the pot when times were hard. And we're not talking empty calories. Labla beans are packed with protein, iron, and fiber, a nutritional win for a population constantly on the edge of food insecurity. But here's the kicker. Labla also fixed nitrogen in the soil. That meant it actually improved the earth it grew in. Farmers didn't know the science, but they knew crops did better after a Labla harvest. It was like giving the soil a nap and a protein shake at the same time. In modern agriculture, we chase climate-resilient crops. Ancient Egyptians already had one. Labla didn't just feed families, it restored fields, offered shade, and kept growing when the sun turned the world to toast. Why don't we grow it now? Because Labla doesn't like being rushed. It needs time, patience, and a little vertical space. And let's be honest, modern farming likes things short, fast, and easy to package. But in the temples and backyards of ancient Egypt, Labla was more than just a bean. It was a symbol of endurance, quiet, dependable, and tough as limestone. If there's one dish that screams ancient Egyptian comfort food, it's Mlocia, or as it's known in English, Jew's mallow. Sounds regal, right? Now wait till you hear what it actually looks like. A bowl of hot, slimy green goo. Delicious. But jokes aside, Mlocia was, and still is, one of the most beloved and nutritious dishes in Egypt. The plant itself? A leafy green packed with vitamin A, vitamin C, calcium, iron, and more fiber than a pyramid has bricks. In fact, Mlocia leaves contain twice the calcium of spinach and way more beta-carotene. It's practically a multivitamin disguised as soup. The story goes that even the pharaohs ate it, believing it had medicinal powers. And who could blame them? Ancient doctors prescribed Mlocia for everything from fevers to digestive problems. It was their version of chicken soup for the soul. If chicken soup was green and had the consistency of cooked okra, now you can't just pluck this plant and chew it raw. Mlocia needs finesse. The leaves are finely chopped, often with garlic and coriander, then simmered into a stew so slimy it could slide off your spoon before you even blink. That texture? Some people love it, others need to be talked into it. But in ancient Egypt, texture didn't matter. What mattered was that Mlocia grew easily, could be harvested multiple times a season, and delivered serious nutrition when little else was available. It was the ultimate resilience food, thriving in poor soils and dry heat, while everything else begged for mercy. Today, Mlocia is still a household name in Egypt and parts of the Middle East, but outside the region, it's vanished from plates, simply because Western palates got scared off by the slime factor. So, if you're willing to get over the viscosity, you'll discover what ancient Egyptians already knew. Mlocia might look like a swamp in a bowl, but it feeds like royalty. When you hear papyrus, you probably picture scrolls, scribes, and ancient paperwork, not something you'd bite into. But in ancient Egypt, papyrus wasn't just for writing history, it was for surviving it. Yes, they ate it. The root of the papyrus plant was considered edible, especially by those living near marshy areas of the Nile. It wasn't gourmet fare, but when food was scarce, the root became part of the peasant pantry. It was fibrous, starchy, and slightly sweet, similar to celery's tough cousin who lives in a swamp. You didn't exactly crave it, but it filled your stomach. And in ancient times, that was sometimes the only goal. Some texts suggest they roasted the roots or boiled them until soft, turning them into a chewy snack or a broth base. And if you were desperate, raw papyrus root worked in a pinch, though we're not saying it tasted great. Imagine chewing on a slightly sweet pool noodle dipped in river mud. Not quite a delicacy, but it kept the hunger away. The entire plant was useful. Stalks became boats, mats, baskets, and of course, the world's first paper. But the root? That was your "we've got nothing left in the granary" fallback. In modern times, papyrus has gone back to being ornamental or symbolic. But back then, it was the Swiss Army knife of plants, structure, survival, and, something to snack on when you ran out of tiger nuts. So next time you're writing on paper or scrolling a PDF, just remember, your document's ancient cousin may have once been someone's lunch. Next up, purslane, or as modern gardeners call it, that annoying weed in the cracks of my driveway. But back in ancient Egypt, it was food, real food, packed with more omega-3 fatty acids than most fish and richer in vitamins than your overpriced multivitamin gummies. This succulent, low-growing plant was everywhere. Fields, gardens, riverbanks, even temple courtyards. Egyptians didn't try to pull it out, they pulled it in, right into their bowls. Why? Because purslane grows like it's on a mission. No water, no problem. Terrible soil, still thriving. It's basically the ancient plant version of "I understood the assignment." Flavor-wise, purslane is surprisingly refreshing. A little tangy, a little lemony, with a slight crunch from its thick, juicy leaves. It was often eaten raw in salads or cooked down into hearty stews, where it added both nutrition and that slightly sour brightness Egyptians seemed to love. And if you're thinking, did peasants really care about omega-3s? No, but they did notice that eating purslane kept them going during brutal summers and long field days. Plus, traditional Egyptian medicine praised it for cooling fevers, calming inflammation, and even helping with digestion. Today, most people toss it out as a nuisance. But ancient Egyptians, they saw purslane for what it really was, a resilient, nutritious, multi-purpose green that asked for nothing and gave everything. Honestly, it's the underdog hero of ancient plant life, quietly holding civilization together while modern diets chase kale like it's the Messiah. Next on our edible time machine tour, water lily seeds. Yes, those beautiful blue and white flowers floating on the Nile weren't just decoration, they were dinner, or at least a crunchy snack. The ancient Egyptians harvested seeds from Nymphea caerulea, aka the sacred blue lotus. While the flower got all the religious fame, more on that in another video, the seeds were quietly fueling the people. They called them sessines, and you could find them in nearly every home, from peasant huts to palace kitchens. How did they eat them? They roasted them, they boiled them, they ground them into flour to make a sort of seed cake, kind of like if trail mix and flatbread had a baby. And here's the kicker. These little seeds were nutritional bombs. High in protein, rich in starch, and able to be stored for long periods, they were the ancient answer to energy bars. Forget granola. Egyptians were snacking on water lilies before it was cool. What made them even more valuable was where they grew, the Nile and its marshes. In a land where farming meant praying, the floods didn't wipe out your crop. Having a backup food source just floating around was genius, and of course, it didn't hurt that they were considered sacred. Eating something that symbolized the sun, God rising each day? Bonus points. But over time, water lily seeds were left behind. Too small, too delicate, too easy to replace with grains like wheat and barley. Now they're mostly remembered for their spiritual symbolism. But the truth is, they were a survival staple. Imagine popping a handful of ancient Egyptian lotus puffs while watching hippos bathe and priests chant. That's not just history, that's lifestyle. You didn't need to own land to eat well in ancient Egypt. Sometimes the best food was just growing on the side of the road. Enter wild mustard greens. These leafy greens were the unofficial salad of the Nile, popping up everywhere from irrigation ditches to temple courtyards, and Egyptians, being the resourceful folk they were, turned this common weed into a culinary and medicinal all-star. The taste? Bold, peppery, slightly bitter, like arugula's tougher, more opinionated cousin. But here's the thing, these leaves weren't just spicy for fun. That kick came from glucosinolates, natural compounds that helped the body detoxify. So yes, these ancient greens were basically the detox tea of the time, except they actually worked. Cooks tossed the young leaves into stews or ate them fresh with onions and vinegar. Older leaves. Boiled to soften the bite and served with lentils. And the seeds? Don't get us started. Crushed wild mustard seeds were the seasoning of choice long before black pepper made its way into Egyptian trade routes. They added heat, depth, and, let's be honest, a little flair to otherwise humble dishes. But these plants weren't just kitchen MVPs. Egyptian healers used them for everything from chest pain to digestive issues. Want to clear your sinuses? Try a poultice of mustard greens slapped right on the skin. Instant burn, instant relief, instant reminder that ancient medicine was not messing around. Over time, wild mustard got tamed. It evolved into the leafy mustard greens and yellow condiment we know today. But its wild roots fed the masses, spiced the food, and even helped heal the sick. So next time you see a weed with attitude growing by the water, remember, 5,000 years ago, it was dinner. Before we dive in, yes, we know what you're thinking. Wait, didn't we just talk about water lilies? It's a fair question. Lotus and water lilies are cousins, both floating gracefully on Egyptian waters and featured in ancient art. But make no mistake, they're different plants with different flavors, textures, and edible parts. And the lotus root? That's a whole crunchy, starchy world of its own. Lotus flowers might be famous for their beauty, but in ancient Egypt they were more than just pond decoration. They were a full-course meal with petals. And beneath the elegant white or blue blooms was the real prize, the lotus root. Imagine a vegetable that looks like a cross between a pepperoni slice and a piece of plumbing. Hollow chambers, crunchy texture, and a slightly sweet, nutty flavor. It was nature's answer to the question, what if vegetables could also be fun to look at? But the appeal of lotus roots went far beyond looks. They were resilient, growing in Egypt's marshy floodplains where other crops wouldn't dare root themselves, and that made them a reliable food source during Nile floods and dry seasons alike. Cooks sliced them thin and fried them like chips, boiled them in stews, or roasted them over hot stones. When fresh, they had a crisp snap, like jicama. Dried, they could be rehydrated and used later. Refrigeration? Still thousands of years away. Shelf-stable root snacks, already on the menu. Nutritionally, lotus roots packed a surprising punch. Fiber, vitamin C, potassium, the kind of stuff that would land you a Whole Foods price tag today. And here's the kicker, these edible roots were also symbolic. The lotus was a sacred symbol of rebirth, linked to the sun god Ra. So yes, Egyptians were munching on a divine snack, the ancient equivalent of eating holy kale. Medicinally, the root was used to soothe upset stomachs and even staunch bleeding wounds. If you were lucky enough to live near a lotus pond, your body and your belief system were covered. Today, lotus root still thrives in parts of Asia, but in Egypt it faded from the kitchen as farming centralized and wetlands shrank. But once upon a time, this aquatic root powered the people of a civilization that built pyramids, and still had the energy to decorate tombs afterward. Let's get one thing straight. Ancient Egyptians were ahead of their time in a lot of ways. They built pyramids, aligned temples with the stars, and, apparently, decided to chew on what tasted like bitter burnt maple syrup for health. Enter fenugreek, or as we like to call it, the spice that launched 1,000 grimaces. Fenugreek seeds were everywhere, crushed into spice blends, steeped in teas, mixed into bread, even used as perfume base. Because who doesn't want to smell like ancient curry and armpit herbs? But Egyptians didn't just use it for flavor. They genuinely believed it had magical properties. It was prescribed for fever, digestion, childbirth recovery, and even used in embalming rituals. That's right. If you weren't eating it alive, it was probably getting sprinkled on you after death. Medicinal papyri praised it for its cooling nature and ability to calm the stomach, which, let's be honest, probably needed calming after chewing gritty bread, drinking warm beer, and brushing with eggshell paste. And here's the kicker, modern science actually agrees with the Egyptians. Fenugreek is packed with iron, magnesium, fiber, and can help regulate blood sugar. So basically, ancient Egyptians were swallowing bitterness in exchange for better blood flow. Still, we have to wonder, how desperate were they to feel better that they turned to this? Did someone just eat a fistful of seeds and say, yeah, it tastes like regret, but I feel fantastic? So next time you're choking down a trendy wellness smoothie that tastes like lawn clippings, just remember, the Egyptians already did it 3,000 years ago. And they didn't even have Instagram to brag about it. Forget quinoa. Forget sourdough starters. If you really want to eat like royalty, or more accurately, like a brick-hauling, sun-baked Egyptian peasant, then say hello to Emma wheat. This ancient grain was everywhere. It fed workers, it fed priests, it fed the gods. Okay, technically the gods didn't eat it, but offerings of emmer bread piled up in temples like glutinous tribute towers. Before modern wheat ever showed up in your overpriced health food aisle, emmer was the real MVP of the ancient pantry. Coarse, nutty, dense, and harder to grind than your last breakup. Every loaf was a labor of love and dental destruction. Why? Because emmer came with bonus content, sand. Grinding it between stone mills meant every bite included a little extra crunch. That's not fiber, that's erosion. But nutrition-wise, emmer delivered. It was packed with protein, B vitamins, and trace minerals. Which was great, because that bread was basically the only thing most people ate 3 times a day. And if you think gluten is a modern curse word, guess what? Emmer's full of it. But it's an ancient kind of gluten, less refined, less processed, and somehow still not very helpful to celiac. Emmer wasn't just food, it was currency. Wages were paid in it, taxes collected in it. And when someone died, their tomb got stocked with emmer loaves for the afterlife. Because who wants to be hangry in the underworld? So what happened? How did a civilization that once thrived on lotus roots, tiger nuts, and wild greens end up forgotten beneath layers of sand and supermarket shelves filled with processed junk? The truth is, ancient Egyptians knew things we've only just started to rediscover. That food wasn't just survival, it was medicine, ritual, identity, and community. They farmed with the flood cycles, cooked with instinct, and healed with what grew in their own backyards. Not because it was trendy, because it was all they had. And now? Most of those plants grow in silence, uncultivated, unseen, waiting for someone curious enough to bring them back. Because maybe the answer to healthier living, more sustainable eating, and reconnecting with the past isn't in a lab. It's in the forgotten vegetables that once fed the world's first great empire. If this peek into Egypt's ancient pantry made you think twice about what's on your plate today, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments, which of these ancient foods would you actually try? Or better yet, which one do you think deserves a comeback? We've got more ancient survival, forgotten wisdom, and oddly edible history coming soon. So stick around, because next time you hear someone say they don't make food like they used to, you'll know they're absolutely right. And maybe it's time we start again.